So I really enjoyed the last suggestion series I did for Foxhole, so I'm back at it. Today, we're going to look at Foxhole's outdated navies, and what needs to change. These will be suggestions for naval and amphibious gameplay in Foxhole. The devs have already announced that after the 1.0 update, the next major update will be focused on revamping naval assets. So, they are asking for suggestions, and I've got quite a few. So what will I be covering? First, I'll brief you with a short history on Foxhole's naval assets, the shortcomings of Foxhole's current naval implementation, some broad suggestions based around 4 components, a sea component, an amphibious component, a shore component, and a map component, as well as a few additional ideas towards the end. It's time for a history lesson, kids. Foxhole's naval history. The first dip into naval was update 0.4 back in 2017. This was the update that introduced barges and APCs so that you could ferry infantry and vehicles across bodies of water. Gunboats were later added in update 0.6 back in 2017 as well. This was also the update that introduced Westgate, more on that in a bit. The second naval revamp was in 0.14 in 2018. This introduced the White Whale landing ships, as well as some other changes to the gunboats and some faction-specific skins. Motorboats were added in 0.21 in 2019. Freighters were added in War Machine later that year in Update 26. And faction watercraft were added in Update 37, the Arms Race update. This was notably the faction-specific Doru Colonial APC and the Warden Meteora gunboat. However, since that time, since 2020, no new naval vehicles or major mechanics have been added. No major revamps have happened for naval since 2018. So, if you thought Logi had it bad, oof. The Navy's practically drowning. Well, I mean, without boats, they kind of are. So what are some of the current limiting factors for naval gameplay? Well, I think the first is pretty obvious. There's kind of a big lack of open water. There's a lot of crowded waterways, be it from bridges, from land, or even the larger bodies of water like you see between Woodbind and Endless Shore and Surgegate and Tempest Island. That large body of water is split between 3 maps. There are 3 loading screens, potentially, if you're trying to circulate around this body of water. A lack of beaches and landing grounds. Look at Endless Shore. There's hardly any beaches there beyond Tuatha Watchpost. There's really not a lot to go on. And here's the Westgate example I was talking about. When Westgate was first introduced, they had the artwork focus on this rocky and jagged coastline where gunboats were supposed to chase each other around these rocks and shoot at each other. When was the last time you saw a boat go through there? Most of the shipping lanes in Westgate go beyond Handsome Hideaway, the island offshore. So that whole section that could have been used for some cool cat and mouse gameplay never really ends up seeing that function, at least not to my experience. A lack of naval capabilities, which we will talk extensively about. One example that I would like to point out is there's no Warden-specific APC, and I'm harping on this point just to demonstrate. So on the left, you see the Colonial Doru APC with its mounted machine gun. On the right, you see the Warden Meteora gunboat with its 2 120mm artillery cannons. If the Colonials and the Wardens select these 2 naval vehicles, and the Wardens do not have access to their other gunboat with the machine gun on it, the Colonials are the only ones with a direct fire vehicle on the open seas. Because if the Wardens don't get access to their machine gun wielding gunboat, these Meteoras are basically toast against APCs. It's extremely hard to hit a moving APC with a 120mm cannon, and especially when it travels near to the same speed at you, if not faster. And believe me, I've tried because I team killed a friendly gunboat trying to hit an APC that was tacking it at point blank range. And I'm not harping on this as a balance issue, oh, give the Wardens an equivalent. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's major gaps in what the factions have available to them. I'm just using this specific example because I still feel bad about that team kill. There's a lack of interaction between other systems and mechanics. For example, navies have zero intelligence or counterintelligence. There just isn't any. Strapping a guy with a radio backpack to a gunboat doesn't really count as naval intelligence when you can only detect things 10 to 20 meters away from you. And there's little in the way of naval specialization. This would probably come in the form of uniforms or something down the line. The key word I want to stress about this presentation is capabilities. This presentation will largely not be suggestions of specific naval vehicles, but of classes or capabilities vehicles could fill. If you want specific vehicle suggestions, all you have to do is look at the Reddit or the Discord. There's plenty of great suggestions out there. Potato Emperor has been dumping loads of ship suggestions, and Kobitsu Studio has that fantastic light patrol boat concept art they worked up. But anyways, my proposed flowchart looks like this. At least that's what it did months ago when I first came up with it. I don't know that I would specifically organize things this way anymore, but I am still going to use its basic template to go over the different components I feel and what capabilities they are lacking. First up, let's start offshore with the sea component. So type of vehicle that a lot of people have been asking for in the Navy is submarines. Obviously, they would carry something like a small load of torpedoes. They would have the ability to hide or dive when they're in the water. Thus, they would act kind of like how bushes act on land. But they could also serve multiple purposes, and I think most of the ships I'm going to talk about should serve multiple purposes. And I believe submarines could be used for small supply runs, and I'm not just pulling that out of nowhere. There is actually an example from the Second World War at the Battle of Guadalcanal. The Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were suffering from a lack of logistics in any sense of the word, and they got desperate enough to actually send submarines with supplies on them to drop off supplies at night and then exfil out of there without being seen. So a little bit of stealth logistics for beleaguered forces could really be something interesting in Foxhole that you don't really see anywhere else. I mean, what other game features that kind of gameplay, right? Destroyers/corvettes. Personally, I think the gunboats need to be scrapped and replaced with something slightly larger and slightly more utilitarian. It's pretty obvious. Heavy armor, heavy armaments allow for ship-to-ship and shore bombardment capabilities, but this would be the class of vehicle I would put radar or intel gathering systems on to play cat-and-mouse gameplay with other enemy gunboats or destroyers or corvettes or whatever. If you have radar systems attached, you'd be tracing each other by map signatures. This would also be a way to try and detect enemy submarines. Submarines are stealthy after all, but you point one of your radar systems in the right direction and hey, you spot an enemy on the map, but you still need to investigate it, of course. Of course, you could also just use these intel systems for gathering details on shorelines to see if there are any acceptable landing sites for a naval landing that'll happen later on. And I just want to point out, I think the way Battlefield 1 did it is the best way to do it, where you don't have every single thing you can do on a ship be available for players to do. A single destroyer would take up half the population of a map if you allowed them to do that. I think we can get away with simplifying some of the roles. In Battlefield 1, there's 4 guns on the Dreadnought, a driver, and an AA gunner. Obviously, we don't need the AA gunner in Foxhole, but for the gunners, they each controlled 2 guns, or basically half of a broadside. So you can simplify the roles a little bit to make it work with the population numbers we have to deal with in Foxhole. Basically, these things should be like a heavier class of tank on land, but, in the water. And lastly, I think a mine layer, a minesweeper, or some sort of support ship would be a great asset for navies in Foxhole. What I envision is a small craft with a crane. It's lightly armed, if at all, and it has the ability to deploy things like sea mines. Naval defenses would be really interesting, and giving the navies essentially the equivalent of an engineer role, I think would be a great way to diversify naval gameplay. Mines could be set, mines could be disarmed, These cranes could also be used to offload logistical supplies from freighters onto shore. Instead of having to bring a crane with you or build one on the beach, why not just have a crane on a boat from the get-go? Also, there's potential for repair and support roles. Alright, put your hands up if you've ever done this in Foxhole. Struggled to repair a ship either at sea or on a beach. Yeah, trying to repair a ship in Foxhole, unless you're at a dock, is nigh impossible. Alright, number 2 is the Amphibious component. Here's my little crappy drawing there. So, landing ships, the white whales. I think they could use a bit of a rework. This might be an out there idea, but I'm going to pitch it anyways just to get people thinking. Give them the ability to deploy offshore. This would either be a replacement or an addition to them deploying directly onto the beach. Here's how the process would work. A landing ship would land offshore. Troops would load onto APCs via some sort of net ladders. APCs would cycle waves of troops to the shore and then return to the ship to pick up more troops. Obviously, these troops can spawn on these ships at sea, just like they can now when they beach themselves. And why I think this is crucial is that it would allow wider, more sustained, and multiple beachheads to occur from a single ship. Right now in Foxhole, if you miss out on the initial landing for a naval assault, you pretty much miss your chance at having your little D-Day. In a system where they can spawn out at shore and then deploy into APCs and hit the beach repeatedly, it gives more people more chances to actually have that moment of hitting the beach. The other reason, if you're experienced with Foxhole navies, is yeah, it's not really fun to get beach camped. I think a lot of us have been there. Okay, so barges and freighters. Honestly, I think barges need to go. Mostly because they're really ugly. I'm sorry. Turn them into something more like LSTs. Having multiple transport ships combine already existing roles in Foxhole will help to reduce sea lane clutter. We've all seen port bases where there's just stacks upon stacks of abandoned ships there. It's kind of annoying to navigate around them. LSTs, or landing ship tanks, should be able to land multiple vehicles to reduce beach clutter and give landings a better chance of success. We've all seen it before. Multiple tanks hit the beach, but then the second wave can't follow up because a bunch of barges are just stuck at the beach with no reason or no incentive to unclog the beaches once you hit it. I don't think combining multiple barges into a single ship is really going to affect the attacker's advantage or disadvantages when assaulting a beachhead. And also amphibious armor. Give us some amphibious tanks. It would diversify the APC vehicle class because they would be much lighter tanks, and they just sound cool. Alright, so the shore component, the third component. This mostly revolves around the idea of mulberry harbors. They are constructible and maybe upgradable docks / moles / harbors to onload and offload cargo. We saw these in heavy use during the D-Day landings in World War II. They help speed and organize logistical runs. They decrowd beaches by pushing that logistical component offshore. They provide point targets for things like submarines or artillery to focus their fire on. And they're a natural extension of what's already happening in-game with the player-made ports. This one's kind of a no-brainer. And there's also the possibility of expanding on that with things like buildable cranes and storage sheds that you could strap onto these mulberry harbors so that sea logistics can drop off supplies at a shed and then be off instead of having to go all the way to the beach or drop it off on the dock and then drive a truck all the way to the beach. And this is where that support ship with the crane comes in again. So, map components. Beaches. We need more beaches. I personally have suggested a 50-50 split between landable and not landable beaches. Some people have suggested a higher percentage, some people a lower percentage, but I think it needs to be higher than it is now. I think most people can agree on that. There's not a lot of options when it comes to beach landings. More open seas are needed. That one should be pretty obvious, I talked about that already. Return to some isolated capture points. Not huge amounts, but some. Friendly reminder that this is what Orebreaker Isles used to look like. Notice lack of bridges. Now I'm not saying maps have to look like this again, but eliminating a couple of islands, eliminating some bridges, would really open up those sea lanes to allow for that naval gameplay to really flourish. Open ocean travel system. Okay, this is a last minute suggestion I had, but right now, if you were to take a boat from Morgan's Crossing and you wanted to get all the way to the Fingers, you'd have to go through Godscroft, go through Tempest Island, and then go through and travel to the Fingers. The problem is, if Godscroft or Tempest or both are contested, you might have to hit 2 queues on the way there, and that's extremely annoying. What if there was a way to transport yourself from Morgan's Crossing up north all the way to the Fingers, and all you would have to do is take an extra 10 minutes at the loading screen or something. You know, go make yourself a coffee and then come back and you'll be transported. There's a lot of open ocean beyond the playable area of the world. Why not let us use it, or at least pretend to use it, with a loading screen? Oil rigs? So going back to that more isolated capture point, I think oil rigs would be a way to add naval-specific resources to the world, so that navies can really start performing logistical roles too, if, a faction so chooses. And I'm not just making this up either. This was actually concept arted back in the day. Now, they never went beyond the concept art stage, to my knowledge, but I think it's a really cool idea. I would love to fight on an oil rig. Plus, it would give a good reason for marine uniforms to be added in. Currents based on water type. Oceans versus lakes versus rivers. So basically, I'm proposing what Realistic Water 2 in Skyrim does. Mostly visual, although it can be mechanical as well. Basically, different currents based on the type of water you're in. An ocean doesn't flow the same way that a lake does, after all. So some additional mechanics or items I'm thinking of. Rolling waves, and this is what I was talking about with the differing currents. Essentially, these would be baked-in ship animations that can throw off your accuracy and add some atmospherics to boats. Right now, boats just travel on the water in a flat plane. I think a little bit of rocking animations are sorely needed, and I don't think waves or wave physics should be added because those would probably kill the servers. Just make it an animation thing baked into the vehicles themselves. Weather system. The weather system doesn't affect naval very much right now, other than maybe some of the cannon firing. Snowstorms could loosen ice that might slightly damage a ship if you hit it, or rainstorms might increase what I talked about above, with heavier rolling waves that throw off your accuracy even more. Ship radar. We talked about this a lot, but creating that cat and mouse gameplay of ships trying to track and hunt each other, or to help scout shore defenses, I think would be a great asset in the game. Star shells, or flare shells. Illuminates targets, helps spot submarines. Let's be honest, it just looks cool. Rivercraft, as I talked about earlier, PT boats, fast-moving patrol boats, used for small-scale attacks and raids. I think we need more than just our crummy little motorboats, but don't need something as heavy as a gunboat for stuff like this. How about animations? Sinking animations. Right now, ships on the water just explode and the crew's instantly killed. Sinking animations would actually give an incentive to add not only life jackets or life jacket uniforms to the game, but actually give an incentive for people to try not to give up. If their ship sinks, maybe another ship can come by and rescue them. That would be such a cool gameplay and team play moment right there. And also water impact animations. This one's purely visual, but shells just travel through the water and explode on the ocean floor right now. It looks kind of dumb, so I want some water impact animations. Alright, so here's my closing thoughts. Foxhole's Naval Theater is long overdue for a rework, as has been announced. Capabilities of both navies need to be expanded, not just by adding new ships. Logistics, and really any role that you can find on land, needs to be an integral part of the new navies. Mechanics and systems can help add more immersion to naval gameplay, and I need to stop with the water puns. But ultimately my message I think is this. To the devs, naval gameplay should be able to stand on its own. Every part of what's on the land version of Foxhole should be available to the naval version of Foxhole as well. There should be engineer roles out at sea. There should be artillery, spotting, scouting roles out at sea. There should be logistical roles out at sea. All of these things. If there was no land masses in Foxhole and you only had ships to go off of, the Foxhole gameplay should stay intact. I think that is my ultimate point with these capabilities. And with that, I think I'll wrap up this presentation, because it's getting quite long already. So, components or capabilities. What did I miss? Is there a mechanic you think would work well for Naval? Is there a vehicle you think would provide the capabilities we discussed? Or do you think my ideas are dumb? I don't mind people telling me my ideas are dumb, but do please explain why you feel that they're dumb. Also, is there any other topics you'd like to see me tackle for the next suggestion series? I realize I have a lot of ideas floating through my head, and I could talk about them for hours, so I intend to keep doing this. And as always, good luck, keep your heads down, and stay in your foxholes. Bear out.